Joshua's Long Day. My name is Daniel Vallis from InformedChristians.com, a website ministry devoted to discerning current events from a Christian and biblical perspective. Thank you for all those who send in news and articles and tips and your feedback. It is greatly appreciated, and I definitely do consider it all, and I love hearing from you. Also, thank you to those who financially support this ministry. It is a great blessing, and it gives so much liberty to research and to create the infographics to convey the information that we're studying. So thank you for that, and especially thank you for all your prayers. I need strength, I need wisdom, I need grace, and thank you for those who go before the throne of grace on our behalf. This video is a warning, but it is not a prediction. I do not know the future, but I will share with you what we see going on right now and what we can make some guesses about. But we do not know the future, but we do see that time is running out and things are coming together that we need to pay attention to. We need to be sober, we need to be vigilant, and we need to be ready. We see so much enemy activity over the past few weeks and days, and also a lot of prophetic information with celestial signs and a lot of other things that we've been pointing to, all coming together at this time, and especially a huge ramp up in enemy activity, pointing to the concept of gateways, time, Apollyon, and all of that. And we've talked about before how Christ has been weaving a tapestry of redemption throughout prophecy, and also with the patterns and shadows that are at this time. But then also the enemy is also weaving a tapestry for his disciples, and he's getting them ready. And so as watchmen, I've been pointing out what they've been doing, but then also pointing out Christ's tapestry as well, pointing out both sides of the activity and how they're both pointing to this time that's very important. Of course, there's been a lot of talk about the arches that are going up in Trafalgar Square. And we pointed out over a week ago that the one that they're making is the Arch of Triumph, and you can still find that on their website. But we came across this news article the other day, talking more about it and actually talking with the director of the institute who's creating the Arch of Triumph, and talking with the stonemasons who are actually engraving it. In this statement, Masari is the co-owner of the Carrera workshop where it is being manufactured from 7 blocks of Egyptian marble. We are very happy to do this, and we feel that it will be something that can change the history of what happens, he tells me. If his syntax sounds chronologically confused, it is no more so than the Arch project itself, which takes the memory of a destroyed past and recreates it in a physical form in the present, with an eye very much on the future. And we've talked about this before, of the overtones and the allusions to time and the importance that this gateway is not just a gateway, not just something physical, but it represents so much more to them. And that's what we need to look at it is, this is a message. They're placing this there for a message, not necessarily a satanic ceremony, although there may be spiritual connotations and overtones and importance with that there too as well. But it is a very strong message and pattern and signal to Satan's disciples primarily. We're going to be looking more at the symbolism wrapped up in it and encapsulated in it. And we need to look at it. This is a very strong message and warning from Satan to his disciples about what they are trying to change, what they are about to do. And we showed pictures before of the Arch of Triumph being constructed. And in this article, the director of the institute who's making it says that it's almost done being made and they're going to be transporting it and setting it up pretty soon by Nelson's Column in Trafalgar Square. And it's just going to be up for 2 days. They're going to be setting it up on the 18th, but then it'll be there for the 19th and 20th. And of course, there's been a lot of confusion and misdirection and misinformation about the 2 gates, but we've talked about this in our video over a week ago of how they are building the one, but they were strongly implying and had also supposedly intended on making the one. But what we have seen is that they're weaving the 2 patterns together. They're mentioning both almost simultaneously, but they are building the Roman Triumphal Gate, which is not too far from the actual Baal Gate. But what they're doing is blending the 2, because they're presenting the concepts of the 2. The Baal Gate is still there. It's still the original. But they're linking that concept with the Roman Triumphal Gate. They're blending them together to have the concepts of the Triumphal Gate, which is going to be important in the symbolism, but then also the Palmyra, the concepts of tying Palm and Triumphal Gate, but then also Baal, and from Palmyra, a very significant city that even Solomon had a part in making, and allusions to even the 2 pillars on the temple being mimicked here by the symbolism. And that's what Satan is doing. He's mimicking, he's counterfeiting. He's coming close. He's presenting a counterfeit picture pattern to the triumphal Palm Sunday entry. So we're seeing multiple pictures and patterns encapsulated in this gate that they are building there. And we talked about before the concepts of time that they're also conveying too as well with Apollo, the sun god, and other allusions to time and spirals of time and double helix spiral of time. Also allusions to altering DNA and the Jacob's ladder of the fallen angels too as well, opening heaven with CERN technology. There are so many patterns coming together because they're all involved in the tapestry that Satan is weaving and readying his disciples with right now. We've talked before of the Rahab picture that they also placed at this exact same time because they know what time it is, and they also know prophetically the bride will be leaving pretty soon as well, escaping. And they tied it to the church at Trafalgar Square too because they are tying all this together. They are warning their disciples, and they're using the mainstream media with their winks and nods, so to speak, to alert his disciples about it. If you haven't yet, download our material, Revelation Spiral of Time. There's a lot of other resources too in the description box. And Lord willing, I'm going to combine several of our resources together into a larger infographic to give a better picture of where we are right now. But definitely check out all the information there because it's still relevant and great reference material and reminds us of why we've been looking at this time. It is our Rahab's cord out the window, reminding us of the promises and of what is going on right now. And we've talked about how the Baal Gate, this whole story and emphasis on the gate, at the same time as Christ's triumphal entry is because he's counterfeiting it. The Antichrist is about to pull off very similar messaging to counterfeit it and to present himself as the Messiah. And we've talked about the concept of highways, dimensional highways, gateways, and they're also promoting that too as well. And it ties in with the concept of what has been called the Rainbow Bridge. And we've talked about this in our video Time CERN in the Bible, link in the description box. Of breaking down gravity's bridge is what the physics term for it is. And so oftentimes you'll see a reference to gravity's bridge going over the rainbow. And even one of the physicists at CERN said, we have calculated the energy at which we expect to detect these many black holes in gravity's rainbow. A new theory. If we do detect many black holes at this energy, then we will know that both gravity's rainbow and extra dimensions are correct. And so when they make a reference to rainbows, they're talking in multiple levels of they expect to create a bridge to another world. Just like a rainbow breaks down light, they are trying to break down certain aspects of creation to go to another dimension. Their Jacob's ladder, their highway to another dimension. And this layer is presented also in The Wizard of Oz, where they talk about going over the rainbow and showing two different worlds and dimensions, one black and white, one in color. That's one layer of what they present there. There's other layers in messaging too as well, with trauma-based mind control too as well. But it's also in a physical sense and spiritual and dimensional sense too as well. And we see the same concept in the Lego Dimensions. They even tied the direct reference to The Wizard of Oz, going over across the two dimensions, using even a whirlwind to do that, just like the Elijah chariot whirlwind account in Scripture. They're copying all this and they're using the exact same message very blatantly throughout media. And of course the Golden Lion and Opening Gates, we talked about that before. Dimensional gateways and references to alchemy, blending science and magic and Mercury. And we talk about a lot of these in our Time CERN in the Bible videos and articles with PDF versions available on our website too as well. We talked briefly about Joshua's long day, where the sun and moon stopped. That did not stop time, but it stopped the constructs, the measurements of time. The Bible tells us from the very first page that the sun and moon determine the years and the months, and the sun also determines the days, but those are constructs for measuring those as well. When those stop, time itself does not stop, just the constructs stop. And of course this overtones into determining the calendar, determining what prophetic time we are at. Use what Bible tells us to determine time, not some plant, not some rabbinical tabulations. Use what the Bible tells us. The sun and the moon, that determines the years and the months. So today we're going to examine Joshua's long day, because my interest was piqued into, it appears from the biblical account that this event took place right in this time period, right after Passover, shortly after Passover, and shortly after the Jericho events. And we've been looking at a lot of shadows and patterns that happened in this time period. So I was interested to see, is this pattern, type, and shadow woven into the tapestry that's being presented now by Christ? Is this very significant that we need to consider, and especially when we see the enemy alluding to time and changing time, and the Bible tells us that that's going to be a component of the end times, the tribulation time period. So we have to consider and explore, does this fit exactly into this time period we are at right now? Now the Bible doesn't delineate and tell us exactly down to the day when this happened, But it does give several celestial clues and other clues that we're going to look at today where we can get a good guesstimate. We can't say concretely for sure, but we have a very narrowing down of when it appears that it happened, and it appeared in this time period. So I'm going to present my research of a timeline of the events that happened shortly after Jericho. Now, of course, the setting is the children of Israel had just recently come into the Promised Land. They crossed the Jordan River. And they are now at Gilgal, and that's going to be their base of operations for quite a while. But it's just outside Jericho, not too far away from it. Of course, on the 7th day, the walls of Jericho fell down. So we're going to start an educated guess timeline from after day 7. And if you want to, pause this video, grab your Bible, and read along in the relevant passages and pause it as you go. You'll be able to see that it portrays the events as happening very quickly right after the Jericho events. And so that's why we're looking at this happening in this time frame. Again, this is all educated guess. I'm not going to get married to this, but we'll be able to see that it appears to happen very quickly. And you also have to consider the fact that the Israelites had just come into the Promised Land. They are in hostile territory. They're not here to sightsee. They're not going to dilly-dally around. Joshua is very serious. They're going to get the job done. They are here for one important reason, to conquer the land. They're not going to waste time. And another thing we have to consider is that the children of Israel have been traveling for the last 40 years, walking and traveling and marching in ranks very orderly. These people are used to walking and covering distance, and doing so in a timely fashion. They've been battle-hardened by battles already. So we have to keep that in mind when we try to compare distances traveled to today, our mindset. We're talking about people who are very well used to traveling. They grew up traveling. They grew up marching and walking. And when you do studies on walks and marathons today, and even just regular marches that happen today, you'll be able to find that the distances covered here, even though they seem big to us, it would have been no problem to people used to marching and used to walking. These distances and even the times given are no big deal. You know, even on the Appalachian Trail here in the United States, with its ups and downs, it's not unusual for the average healthy person, even carrying a backpack, to be able to do 25 to 30 miles a day on that type of terrain. And here in the Middle East and the land of Israel, there's definitely a variety of landscapes, steep areas, ups and downs, and you don't always travel in a straight line. And when we consider what people used to marching and walking long distances, what they're used to travel and able to travel, then these distances are no problem. So we need to keep that background in our mind when we read all this too as well. So after Jericho, right away, one of Joshua's top priorities would have been to send spies to the next nearest location to start getting the scoop on that. So probably right after Jericho fell, he was sending the 2 spies over to Ai, which was only 11 miles away. And they were going to scope it out, and they reported back that it's a small city, you know, we hardly need to bring anybody at all. And they could have taken the distance there and back in the same day. They could have, because it's a small town, there's really not much to see there and scope out. So they could have been there and back in a day, but we're just going to pad it a little bit just to be on the safe side and just say, hey, it took them 2 days to get there and back, get the men ready for the next day, and then the next day they would have attacked Ai. Now, of course, in the Bible account, things did not go well, and the men fled from Ai, so let's take another day for them to come running back. And also on this same day, Joshua would have gone before the Lord to find out what happened. Why did they defeat us? And that is when God told him there was sin in the camp. There was an Achan. And the next day, Achan was dealt with, and the army was readied and sent that very night back to Ai. And they were sent at night because they were going to surprise Ai with a feigned retreat. So the very next day, 5 days after Jericho, padded just a little bit, it would not have been too unusual to expect Ai to be defeated. It was only 11 miles away. And it was a small city, so it was defeated and burned. And the Bible account also tells us that this involved Bethel as well. Now, Bethel is very important because this is a very historic part of Israel's history. And if you'll remember, the Israelites are named after Jacob. They are descendants of Jacob. Jacob was renamed Israel by God. So the Israelites are Jacob's descendants. And Bethel is very important because Bethel is where Jacob, renamed Israel, saw Jacob's ladder. Genesis 28, 10 through 19. And Jacob went up from Beersheba and went toward Haran, and he lighted upon a certain place, and tarried there all night, because the sun was set. And he took of the stones of that place, and put them for his pillows, and laid down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed, and behold, a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it, and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham thy father, and the God of Isaac. The land whereon thou liest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed. And thy seed shall be as the dust of the earth. And thou shalt spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south. And in thee and in thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed. And behold, I am with thee, and will keep thee in all places whither thou goest, and will bring thee again into this land. For I will not leave thee, until I have done that which I have spoken to thee of. And Jacob awaked out of his sleep, and he said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not. And he was afraid, and said, How dreadful is this place! This is none other but the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. And Jacob rose up early in the morning, and took the stone that he had put for his pillows, and set it up for a pillar, and poured oil upon the top of it. And he called the name of that place Bethel. But the name of that city was called Luz at the first. Bethel is very important because Jacob, the father of Israel, specifically mentioned and alluded that this place was called the house of God, and tied it to this is the gate of heaven. Very strong symbolism and pattern that he's tying to Bethel. And of course, after he got married, he came back to the area. But now we find ourselves after Jacob went into Egypt with his descendants. And remember, they stayed there a while. They became slaves. And the Bible tells us that 430 years later is when they came out at Exodus. Then they spent 40 years wandering in the wilderness. So here they are. This is the first time in 470 years that the Israelites, the descendants of Jacob, Israel, this is the first time in all that time that they have come back to this point. Bethel, the house of God, the gate of God. So this was a very important and significant time. Coming back to the house of God, the gate of heaven in a sense. And the enemy uses this same picture and illusion many times in their twisted and distorted presentations of Jacob's ladder too. They use it as a picture of illumination and ascending to different levels of enlightenment and other distortions too as well. And we talked about the Jacob's ladder at the Vatican with the fallen angels going up and down it too as well. References to CERN technology even in their concept of the Rainbow's Bridge. The enemy has their version of Jacob's ladder, of trying to ascend into heaven, to try and get into the gate of heaven. And those at CERN, they are working on trying to get the key to other dimensions. And of course, right now on the calendar, we find ourselves overlapping this same time when the Israelites have finally come back to Bethel, the house of God, the gate of heaven. Very significant. So when we see the same pattern going on right now, of course we can't nail down exactly to the day, but we see that it's just a few days after Jericho, and it shouldn't surprise us that we see the enemy slamming so many symbols of gates and openings and dimensional portals right now at this time. It shouldn't surprise us because this pattern is mentioned and referenced at this time of a return to Bethel, to that point. So let's keep on going. Now, the Bible tells us that after the destruction of Ai, the whole region's enemy kings realized, hey, we need to rally together because these people are making some very significant inroads into our territory. We need to gather together. We need to attack them, and we need to do something. So we need a time mark that very shortly after Ai was defeated, the enemy is starting to assemble and get ready. It's going to be a while before they attack, but right now at this point, at the defeat of Ai, quickly, right after that, they are already gathering their armies together and ready. This is going to be going on in the background while some other things are going on. So we're going to look at how they are spending over 2 weeks getting ready. So when we do see things further on, it shouldn't surprise us that they are ready in this amount of time. They've had plenty of time to get ready and get assembled and are already moving in that direction, so to speak. So then right after Ai, the Bible tells us that Joshua set up the altar at Ebal, Mount Ebal. And they had an assembly of all the people there too as well. So we have to take this into context as well, traveling with that many people. It's 30 miles away. So to pad it a little bit, these people are used to traveling large distances and they could have made it in a day, but that would be stretching it. So we're going to pad it and give them 2 days. And that would be a very leisurely travel. But we also have to keep in mind, too, they know they are in hostile territory. So they're not going to lollygag as they're walking there. They're going to get there, try to get there quick, camp overnight, do what they need to do, have their camp meeting, and then return as quick as possible. They're not taking their time on any of this stuff on this timeline. We have to consider that. They are in hostile territory, and they know that. So they went to Mount Ebal, and this is a perfect natural amphitheater for addressing thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And scientists have tested this area out, and the Bible talks about that. And even on Mount Ebal, there's a significant altar site that's been rebuilt many times over the years, but a lot of historical references to that as well. We can't go into that here. So we're going to pad it well, give them 2 days to get there, a whole day to have their camp meeting, and then even 2 some days to come back to camp, just to be on the safe side, okay? Now, Gibeon is a nearby city, and Gibeon knew they were most likely next on the list, so they sent ambassadors over to Gilgal to make a peace treaty and pretend that they were far away. So they signed the treaty, and that would have happened in a day. So then we're going to pad it, and just, let's say a day happened for the news to get out to the other nations that Gibeon has signed a treaty with the Israelites. And then the Bible tells us that the king at Jerusalem organized 5 kings to form an alliance army because they realized, hey, if Gibeon has signed a peace treaty with them and they're a very strategic city in our alliance, they're one of the royal cities, they're a big city as the Bible tells it, we need to attack Gibeon real quickly because we can't let the Israelites have it. And if Gibeon is sided with them, we can't allow them to stay. So we need to gather together. We need to get a quick strike force together, just these 5 kings. Let's strike Gibeon and see if we can hold this key city so we can at least hold back the Israelites from coming this direction at least. So we have seen historically back 6 days in that the enemy kings have already started to rally their armies. So they're already pretty well ready, and some of them might have been gathering in cities getting closer and closer. But here's where a sense of urgency went out of, hey, we need to really step on things and really attack them right now. So let's say on 15 days out that they formed the alliance army after they heard the news about Gibeon. And let's give them 6 days to get ready and assemble and get to Gibeon. And when we look at the distances and study the distances, that would not have been any problem at all, especially for an army that was already in the process of getting ready. And with a heightened sense of urgency too as well. It would have been no problem. So the Bible tells us that 3 days after they signed the treaty with the Gibeonites, that they just happened to wander upon them. Maybe their spies directed over that direction and found out, hey, Gibeon's right here. You know, they're not far away. They lied to us. And the Bible talks about that. So then they promised to make them slaves, gathering wood and water and all that. And they'd still spare them, keep their promise. But the Bible does mention that was 3 days later. So then, guesstimate again, 6 days after the 5 kings formed their alliance, a good amount of time for them to arrive at Gibeon and start attacking it 20 days out from the 7th day of Jericho. Then they sent messengers right away to Joshua, who was at Gilgal at this point, and said, hey, save us, come quickly, make good on your word, deliver us, they're attacking us. And it would not have been any trouble for the messengers to travel that distance that day. And then the Bible mentions that Joshua got his armies together and traveled to Gibeon, traveling that entire distance in one night. He sent them at night. And we're going to find out soon that this was very close to a full moon. So that would have even made the travel even much easier. And with Gibeon being key cities and Jericho key cities, there was very likely trade routes between them. Even though the terrain there is pretty treacherous in some spots, it would have been no trouble to cover that amount of distance in one night, especially on a well-illuminated night. So the very next morning is when they attack the forces who are at Gibeon, deliver the city, and they send the enemy running in the direction of Beth Horon. And the Bible tells us this is when God sent hail down and actually killed more of the enemy than the Israelites. So we have to keep that in mind too as well. The Israelites aren't having to do a lot of work. They're really just giving chase. God has killed the majority of the enemy army. All they're doing is, in a sense, mop up, just chasing them and not having to exert themselves all that much relatively. But right now they are forcing the enemy up toward Beth Horon, going through the Ajalon Valley area. And this is when the Bible tells us that Joshua, who would be between Beth Horon and Gibeon, this is when he commanded the sun to stand still over Gibeon. So from his perspective, the sun would be in line over Gibeon. And he said that the moon stands still over Ajalon, which would be in line of sight that direction too as well. So this gives us some very important celestial clues as when this was. And this actually helps narrow down, even though the Bible doesn't give us an exact day and hour that this happened. By looking at these 2 celestial alignments and signs, we can get a very, very good idea of the days in which it happened. And it's a very small time frame actually. And we've talked about this before in the past, many videos ago. But when is the time period when you see a moon during the day at the same time as you see the sun? This happens only in a very small window of time, the week before a full moon and the week after a full moon. That is when you will see the moon during the day. So when Joshua tells us that he saw both the sun and the moon, we automatically know the narrow window that could have possibly happened in. But the Bible gives us some other clues too as well. Let's look at an average calendar from month 1 and the Passover time period and the cycles of the moon that would typically go with that. Now remember, when you use a true biblical calendar, it's pegged to the sun and moon, not a plant, not rabbinical tabulations. It's pegged to the sun and moon, and the months are pegged to the moon. So we know that the month starts at the sighting of the first crescent after a new moon, and then Passover would be 14 days later. And Passover on a true biblical calendar will always be around the full moon. You know, there's slight oscillation with the moon's apogee and everything, so it'll vary a little bit, but it's not unexpected to have a full moon at Passover time, the 14th, around there. So the Bible tells us that the Israelites celebrated Passover when they came into the land. So we automatically know one celestial marker. We know there was a full moon period. They observed Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and they apparently attacked Jericho immediately after it. Again, because they have a sense of urgency. They're here to get the job done. So then, looking at this, we also know that you will only see the moon a week before a full moon and a week after a full moon. Now there's a blind spot right at the full moon because the full moon itself will always rise at sunset and it sets at sunrise. So you'll see the moon during the day right before a full moon and then right after a full moon, but not directly on a full moon. So that also tells us when it wasn't as well. So we see two periods of when the moon would have been visible during the day, and of course right around the Passover time period. But then there's a gap when it would not have been seen. So from these calculations, we can assume somewhere between day 20, 23 that this event happened. Again, this is just a guesstimate. We can't say for sure. But between 20 to 23 days out, it would have been no problem to see the sun and moon and for these events to happen. And because we did pad it a day or two, you could even back it up to the 18th. And when we overlay the moon phases for Jerusalem, Israel, just to get an idea of how the moon would normally regularly appear at this time after day 1 of month 1, this is how it would appear, going from a biblical calendar, not the rabbinical calendar. So this is what the moon cycles are doing right now. And let's lay our guesstimate time frame of it starting after day 7 of the fall of Jericho. And of course, this is when the moon would be visible. During the day, when you see both the sun and the moon together, we find ourselves in that time frame. Very suspicious. And again, what we're looking at, remember, now is the shadow and pattern. We can't say things will happen or things have happened, but what we need to do is back up and say, from a biblical perspective and looking at a guesstimated timeline, we know this shadow and pattern of time being changed, being altered in a sense, that is happening at this exact same time. So we need to consider that. We can't nail down specifics or say certain things will happen, but it should catch our attention that this same shadow and pattern happened in this exact same window, connected with the other events of Exodus and Joshua that have also been tied into the picture of redemption that we've been looking at right now too. So looking at our guesstimate time frame, we talked about how the 20th through the 23rd would have been a very good window, an ideal window for these events to have happened in and transpired in. And that lines up with the window that we're even seeing right now too, and the illusions with the enemy, how they've been pointing out the 19th through the 1st, really. That's a very occult time to them, and really the 19th kicks off those days until the May 1st. So what we need to focus on and really stick in our minds is that very significant biblical time-altering events happened in this exact same window and time frame that both the biblical tapestry is pointing out and Satan with his tapestry, he's pointing out to his disciples too as well. This is a very, very important time between the triumphal entry and the ascension. A very important time. We must be vigilant. The enemy knows what time it is. And just the other day, an article came out, Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven lawsuit. Robert Plant and Jimmy Page face copyright trial. Do you think it's coincidence that a news article, a news bother is made at this time about a stairway to heaven? No. And it's very interesting. The whole story tells you the Stairway of Heaven is connected to this other group called Spirit, who wrote a song called Taurus, and that's a direct reference to the Silver Gate. This is a very important symbol drop that he's making at this time. And of course, Led Zeppelin, look at their most famous poster, all about London and Big Ben and X&O and all that. We don't have time to go over that too as well, but the news article is tying Stairway to Heaven, Led Zeppelin, and planting that right at this time. Because they know this is the time of Jacob's ladder shadow pattern being referenced again, and the time shadow pattern of Joshua's long day. And of course, the references to London again remind us of the 2012 London Olympics, where they had the Churchill figure come out of Big Ben, the clock tower, and declare stop. And the hands on the clock stopped when he said that. The mystery of iniquity is well underway. You need to wake up. They have been messaging this and preparing for this time for a long time. Of course, they opened the London Olympics with the gigantic bell, and that's important. We'll link to some articles talking about that. But then right after they rang the bell, they opened up with songs, including the song Jerusalem. We're seeing so many tie-togethers of the arches and London and Jerusalem, the triumphal gate, the entry there. Satan is mimicking the entire pattern and picture. The anthem that they sang talked about Jerusalem, alluding to England as Jerusalem, building the new Jerusalem, and chariots of fire, a reference to Elijah going up in the whirlwind. We talked about that. And a big emphasis on how England, they're creating a new Jerusalem, a new world order. That's what it's all about. They're creating their own version of Jerusalem and using time to create their own version of eternity. In part of the opening ceremony, the orchestra started by playing Nimrod by Enigma Variations from Elgar. Nimrod! We've talked so much about him. That's the whole crux of what December 25th commemorates, and we pointed that out on our calendar too as well, if we were warned about that as well. Nimrod, they see him as the father of their work. In a good light is how they see him. But the Bible tells us he was the builder of Babylon and the builder of the Tower of Babel. They're all giving reverence to him with this massive ceremony. Nimrod, part of the opening ceremony. And shortly after that, they're doing the maypole dance. Very occult, very messed up. And that, of course, again relates to this April 19th to May 1st time period. Typically done on May 1st, but commemorating the days before that too as well, leading up to that. They did that at the part of the opening ceremony too, because it's all tied together. They're painting a massive picture, tied with playing Nimrod. We talked about the closing ceremony too as well. There's so much symbolism in this. And again, we talk about this in our poster, Revelation Spiral Time, in the videos as well, of why 2012 and after that is so important. Because they are getting things ready to bring in the Phoenix, to bring in their new Jerusalem. They know what time it is. Do we? Are we awake? In The Wizard of Oz, produced a long time ago, notice that Dorothy is standing on a zodiac, the sign of a gateway, and there's so many signs in this. They've been preparing their disciples a long time. They know about this date and this whole agenda way in advance. The mystery of iniquity has been working for thousands of years. And notice in this scene, the focus on the hourglass, and they make a big deal of changing time again. And shortly after this scene related to that, they show another scene, and notice the river. Notice that very distinct shape. They're doing that for a definite reason. That is a reference to time. They're going to be changing time, and it's going to pertain to that particular reference. And when we look at the map we looked at a few days ago of London, where all these events are happening with Trafalgar Square and even the Olympic Stadium, what do you see there? You see the Isle of Dogs, which is directly between the Olympic Stadium and the Royal Observatory. Greenwich time starts here. They're all references to changing time. The whole agenda of the mystery of iniquity involves changing time. And the Trafalgar Square and the London Eye and all that, and with the other references of gateways and Led Zeppelin with the Stairway to Heaven tied to this as well recently. Satan is weaving a very strong picture for his disciples, warning them that time is almost up. We see the enemy very busy. They know time is almost up. Things are about to change. Rahab, the ready bride, the one who has prepared herself, she is about to be delivered. And the enemy also knows that they are about to be unrestrained as well. Are we awake? Are we paying attention? Are we casting off the works of darkness at this late hour? Are we putting on the armor of light? We've talked about so many patterns in the previous days coming together and weaving together, and we cannot point at just one. There's so many patterns that are weaving together at this time, and Lord willing, I'm going to make a poster pretty soon that ties several more of these together and updates it to give a bigger picture of what we've been researching lately. But we are seeing a beautiful picture of redemption, of what God is doing, the mystery of Christ coming together right now at this time. Are we paying attention? It's very beautiful, and it has not stopped. It is still ongoing. When we look at the previous month, we talked about the Passover and Calvary layer of patterns and shadows, and then the Fast Vesper layer, and then the Exodus layer, and then entering the Promised Land layer, and the Ruth layer, multiple interweavings coming together, and then the celestial signs that are still ongoing at this time as well. I went out the other night and looked at Leo in the heavens as well as a reminder of the reality of what is going on right now. But then I was thinking, and the Lord brought to my attention that these patterns did not stop at day 7. They're still going, and that goes on with the patterns that we've been studying with Bethel and Joshua's long day. They're still going. And how they're going on is very important because there is a common thread, which didn't hit me till the other day. But we talked about Exodus and the plagues on Egypt and the original Passover and crossing the Red Sea and how those patterns came into play just a few days ago. And then we talked about the wilderness wanderings, which was a period of 40 years after that pattern. And then we looked at the other layer of entering the promised land, which is connected to the Exodus pattern of crossing the Jordan. And that happened on day 10, the same day as the triumphal Palm Sunday entry. And then Passover in the Promised Land, the very first one, and the events of Jericho, their first victory, and the return to Ai Bethel, the house of God, the gate of heaven, and the sun and moon time stopping. What we've been seeing is an ongoing story blending these two separated patterns, but they are linked, and it's a continuation of the same story at this exact same time on the calendar. But they also have another thread through all of them. Joshua, he was there from day 1. He was not only in the entering the promised land, he was there from day 1 of Exodus. He saw the plagues on Egypt. He was there for the original Passover and the crossing of the Red Sea, played an important role during the wilderness wanderings, and then entering the promised land. Joshua is a very important thread that goes through all of this, tying it together and extending the picture in a beautiful way. And of course, Joshua is a picture of Christ Messiah. They even have the same name, transliterated in Hebrew and Greek. He is a picture of the Redeemer and bringing the people across the Jordan into the promised land. A beautiful thread that we find in this ongoing tapestry of redemption that is still ongoing. And we need to be alert and attentive to the fact that it's still going on and not fall back asleep. We need to stay sober. We need to be vigilant because we are still in the time of Christ's first coming, the time he came to fulfill prophecy, the time he came to die for us, to be the redemption, to be the Lamb. And that story is still going because it goes between the triumphal entry and his ascension. That's when he left. That was the time he was here. In Hebrews 9:28, so Christ was once offered to bear the sins of many, and that happened at Passover. And unto them that look for him shall he appear the second time, without sin unto salvation. We are looking for him to appear the second time. We find ourselves in the eye of a storm, so to speak, right now. Things seem very quiet. But we see so many patterns and shadows all around us, and the enemy actively weaving their tapestry of warnings and celestial signs and prophecy warning us as Christians about what's going on right now. We need to have an understanding of the times and be very sober, be very vigilant, because this is a time we must be very ready, because our Redeemer is coming the second time. So we do not know the day or hour, but we do have the hope that he will be returning for his bride, for his redeemed, the second time very soon. And every man that hath this hope in him purifieth himself, even as he is pure. Make sure you are ready when Christ returns. Make sure you are shining bright for him. Make sure you are serving him first and highest above all else. Maranatha.